Welcome back to a brand new episode of DC and RC. I'm Daniel Cormier, former UFC 2 division champion. Count them. That's 2. And that's my guy, Ryan Clark, right there. Former fantastic football player and analyst. But the reason I say it in that regard is because last week, RC, the Islam Makhachev conversation somehow found its way onto my Instagram. And dare I say, the world was not very nice to my guy RC in the responses. What did you think about the vitriol that these people spewed at you? One guy, Yusuf, said, you think it's boring because you don't know about wrestling and grappling. You only care about striking, but guess what? This is MMA. Do you know how hard it is to advance in position, specifically if you are with a great Gapplers? Hey, look at that. If you're with great Gapplers, Ryan, you know how hard it is to change position when the guy can't even spell. How hard is it to change position in that regard?
First off, I'm glad he could spell Yusuf because he couldn't spell grappler. He acted like he submitted Derek Lewis or that he got Anthony Johnson out of there. I understand that people, I get it. This is MMA. But that was why before I answered your question, DC, I talked about how great Islam Makhachev was in the fight, how dominant he was. And then you asked a simple question about entertainment. And I didn't feel like I was watching Maximus Aurelius in the great arena. I was not entertained.
Ryan, it didn't stop there, though, because here's my guy, Lynch. You don't know what you're talking about. Simple and to the point, RC. You have no idea what you're talking about is what Lynch said.
Well, you know what was so crazy about my mentions, even about my DMs, is that like the people who practice jiu-jitsu or some guys who were truly wrestlers, after we had some of these conversations, by the end, they were like, oh, you do know what you're talking about. Now I see your point. But the problem is this, DC. I get on this show. Obviously, you're a two division champ. You're a dude that's fought at the highest level. So if I disagree with you, to the MMA world, I am wrong. But I had a few people hit me up and say, you know what, RC, you might be onto something.
But let me tell you something, Ryan. I cannot believe you answer people in the comments. You got to stop doing that. But lastly, Back Off Warchild seriously said, mixed martial arts. That includes ground game. Go back to basketball. I never knew you were a basketball player. Ryan, they say you make Stephen A. Smith look intelligent. Geez, now Back Off Warchild was a bit stern with his response.
Hey, Back Off Warchild, he must not really truly want to ever fight because he had to make his name extremely tough. And if I'm being compared to Stephen A, I'm not tripping. I just want ESPN to start writing me some of them Stephen A checks, and I'll talk about basketball, badminton, lacrosse, anything you want me to bring up. I'm here for it.
I mean, this is so crazy how it got a lot of traction, which is great, right? People were engaged in the conversation. And honestly, Ryan, like I said, there is a section of fans that probably agree with you, even though that assessment of the fight was as far off as I ever have seen. But you know what? Hey, some people see it. Some people do it. It doesn't really matter. You know watch what you watched, and it is what it is.
Now you put your boy out there bad. I'm supposed to be your partner, your guy, your friend. And because you have this relationship with Islam, you go on TV and say, man, did y'all see RC said some crazy stuff last week? It actually wasn't that crazy. And the assessment of the fight made sense. I think that people like you who are great wrestlers, excellent grapplers, you enjoy those transitions, as do I. Like when we got to watch Darren Elkins and Minner this week, I enjoyed those transitions, the submission attempts. That wasn't what we got from Islam and Moises, but you still want to be on the other side, and I'm going to let you so we could just move on with the show. So I accept it. DC, I was wrong.
That's what I'm talking about. That's what I've been waiting for. It's simple. All you got to do is just take that big bite of humble pie, and then we're fine, Ryan. You're wrong, and now we can move forward into what's happening now in the world of mixed martial arts, RC.
Well, you know what? You know what? We talked a little bit about our social medias and what people felt like about Islam Makhachev and a little bit of trash talk going back and forth with us. But there was a trash talker who was once the best in the game, but now he's probably going a little bit too far. And that's Conor McGregor. Let's check out some of the things he said before UFC 264.
If it's not calf kicks, it'll be something else, takedowns or boxing that opens up calf.
You're getting walked like a dog in that octagon on Saturday night.
I guess lastly for me, Dustin, I mean, this is obviously different. It was legitimately last time. It's getting kind of ugly again. Is this getting personal for you at this point?
Nah, straight business, man. This is,
You're only a little Your wife is your husband.
And listen, after the fight, Khabib Nurmagomedov had some things to say about Dustin's win over Conor. Good always defeats evil, Khabib tweeted. Very happy for Dustin Poirier. I hope you will get the belt the end of the year. And here was Conor's response, which was tweeted and later deleted. COVID is good and father is evil? Question mark. Now, DC, I know you have a great relationship with Khabib. You know a lot about the relationship he shared with his father. How far is too far, and has Conor crossed the line that he can never come back from?
You know, after the fight with Dustin Poirier, a lot of people questioned whether or not Conor McGregor was reaching to try to get into the head of Dustin Poirier, reach back to a time where he had a trash talk that could affect people. It didn't seem to work against Poirier, and I feel like from him talking about Dustin's wife to now Khabib's father, he is just taking it way too far. And when you're dealing with death and COVID and all these other things that we've dealt with over the last year and a half, that's all off limits. I mean, we talked about wives and families being off limits, but when you're talking about a man's everything, right? Khabib's dad was his everything. And you're talking about him being gone today due to something that has been so terrible for our entire world, and you use that in a sense to get back. And you know what's probably most disturbing, RC, is that this wasn't done the day after the fight or the same night of the fight.
Exactly.
This was done weeks after the fight. So it feels like it was thought of and it was thought through for Conor to tweet something like that. Now, I get shock value and I get trying to get people to talk, but way too far to the point that I immediately called Khabib last night and said, hey, are you okay? Right? Asking him if he's okay after having to see that, especially with no ability to do anything about it again, right? You know, he spoke to my kids at my wrestling program the other day and said that he was never happier than when he got to fight McGregor on the day, because for so long he wanted to get his hands on Conor and beat Conor up. Well, he can't do that no more because he's not a prize fighter anymore. So now he has to just kind of swallow that. So way too far, Ryan. And honestly, when Conor does stuff like that, it's hard to understand how there's still this mass amount of people that support that type of behavior.
Yeah, you know, we talked about it in our first show together, how huge of a Conor McGregor fan I was. And it was some of the trash talk against, you know, the Jose Aldos, the Diazes that I loved because it was witty, it was fun, it was quick. It wasn't about the personal, it was about the fighter. And so now to take it to where you're talking about Dustin Poirier's wife, and even further than that, speaking on Khabib's late father, who passed recently, and also dealing with COVID, something that's touched our entire world. And there probably are very few people in the world that haven't dealt with it personally or that doesn't know someone that has. And so as somebody who, I'm just going to say it right now, as someone who was a former Conor McGregor fan, this is something to me he can never come back from. This isn't fun. This isn't sports. This is real life. And Conor McGregor has crossed that line.
Yeah, you know, absolutely crossed the line. And, you know, I think when stuff like that is being said, I think it's a cry for help, right? Conor has all the money in the world. He has all the fame. But now when you start to dig at that level, it's like somebody needs to get to McGregor and help him, right? Start to kind of reshift his mind and his focus and get him back to a better place. And it's unfortunate. Now, Ryan, I don't know if you can tell, but before I had to switch my microphone. My mic just for some reason went dead on me. So I know that we have to acknowledge
Yeah.
that I have a different mic on as we go forward. And, you know, for as big of a star as Conor McGregor is and was and what he means to the sport, obviously the sport continues to move. And yesterday we got great news that Colby Covington is going to get a rematch against Kamaru Usman in what was one of the greatest fights in the welterweight division's history. These guys were 2-2 going into round 5, and Usman got the finish. So my question to you is this. When you have a guy like Leon Edwards, who has won all these fights in a row, and Colby, who lost to Usman and then gets the title fight after one more win, what fight do you as a fan prefer to see? Do you prefer to see a guy that seems to warrant the shot, or the guy that brings the story with him like Colby Covington?
Listen, I think we kind of underestimate how great the first fight was if we're just talking about somebody that brings a story, DC. This wasn't just a story. I rewatched the fight last night just because I wanted to see if I'd missed anything. What was Colby Covington actually that accurate, or did the overhand rights affect Kamaru Usman? And is Kamaru Usman's chin made out of steel? Because he took some of those shots and just kept walking through it. Going into the 5th round, somebody I respect a ton. I think his name is like Daniel Cormier or something like that. He says it's 2-2 going into the 5th round, and he says out of his own mouth, a 2-division championship fighter says, and these are the 2 best welterweights in the world. Joe Rogan then replies, and the 5th round is going to decide that. When you have a fight that is that exciting, that was that competitive, also with the stories that built up to that night, this is something you have to run back. And don't get me wrong, Leon Edwards is deserving, right? Since the Kamaru Usman loss early on in his career, he's been on a tear. He's been on a streak. He just beat Nate Diaz, right? Even though he got clipped in the 5th round. Like, we saw all of these things, but Colby Covington deserves this opportunity. He deserves this chance, because when you look at Kamaru Usman and his defenses or in his rise to gaining the welterweight belt, the fights haven't really been that competitive. He's truly dominated. You think about Gilbert Burns. Gilbert throws some shots early, but then he dominates him in the 2nd round. Obviously, the knockout on Masvidal. This is the fight that people need to see, DC. And I understand you know the fighter perspective, but you can't tell me you aren't excited about Colby Covington, Kamaru Usman too.
Well, right away, I got excited because I remember what the fight was, but I also remember everything that surrounded the fight, right? How the crowd was so separated. Either you love Colby or you hate Colby, but you do pay attention to Colby Covington. One way or the other, you pay attention. And it felt like Kamaru Usman was fighting for a section of fans that wanted to put Colby Covington in his place, right? Colby Covington is a guy that is very vocal with his opinions. And it felt like Usman was fighting for the right to put him in his place. But, bro, so competitive, so close, and I'm speaking from experience, speaking from talking to Kamaru Usman, speaking from knowing Colby Covington since he was a guy in college when he was choosing what school he wanted to go to, Oklahoma State, Oregon State, or any other college in the country, knowing that those guys are ultimate competitors, and Usman himself understands that this is his toughest fight. He knows that for as much as you dislike Colby Covington, you have to respect him because he's such a dog, RC.
Yes. Absolutely. And so, DC, in preparing to talk about UFC 264, I met Mick Maynard, right, who's one of the UFC matchmakers, and he was talking to me about the stylistic matchups in fights, and that sometimes if you get two black belt jiu-jitsu guys, that you might get a stand-up in the octagon. And we watched Colby Covington and Kamaru Usman, 2 guys who are excellent grapplers and wrestlers, stand toe-to-toe in the pocket and strike from their feet. And that's what was so exciting about the fight. That's why it was so back and forth. But it did seem that Colby's strikes didn't have the exact same effect on Kamaru Usman. Some of the front kicks to the body, some of the uppercuts to the body, the straight right that landed and eventually broke his jaw. Coming into this fight, do you think that the wrestling plays a huger role or a bigger role in this fight, or we get the same type of exciting stand-up matchup we got in Colby Covington, Kamaru Usman 1?
So I think the issue was for Covington, he couldn't take Usman down in the way that he thought he would. but he also couldn't use his cardio as a weapon, right? One thing that Covington does really, really well, and we've seen this on a number of different occasions, is he uses his cardio as a weapon because he can go harder than most people. By the time that he starts to fatigue, guys are completely wiped out. They can't even stand. So he just kind of wears them down. He's like an avalanche going downhill. But Usman was able to stand up to that. Not only was he able to stand up to that and withstand it, he was actually able to take it a step further. And that is what I think happened to Colby. That's why Colby didn't wrestle as much as the fight went longer, because he saw that Usman wasn't going anywhere. Kamaru Usman today is also a better fighter than he was back when they fought in 2018, 2019. I'm not sure if it was 18 or 19. But whenever they fought, he's better today. And it's shown in his performances over Gilbert Burns, over Jorge Masvidal twice, right? It's showing that Usman is still improving. I think a lot of that is a credit to his work with Trevor Whitman. It's going to be a fantastic fight. It's going to headline what could be Madison Square Garden in New York City, which is always a phenomenal card to headline. I mean, the heavyweight championship of the world, Muhammad Ali, Joe Frazier, everybody fought in Madison Square Garden.
Huge, big-time
fights.
fights.
You get that honor,
Absolutely.
It just means a little bit more. And I know that that's not lost on Kamaru Usman or Colby Covington. I cannot wait for those guys to get locked inside the octagon. But RC, before we go forward anymore, we got to pay tribute to our guys over at Manscaped. At Manscaped.com, one of our main sponsors, they've always been there, right? Manscaped. Hold on, let me get it here. All right, Manscaped. The summer's here, and our friends at Manscaped just launched their 4th generation performance package, including the brand new Lawnmower 4.0. Join the 2 million men worldwide who use and trust Manscaped. Upgrade your summer with Manscaped Performance Package 4.0. Inside the package, you'll find the brand new Lawnmower 4.0 trimmer, the Weed Whacker ear and nose hair trimmer, some of their amazing liquid formulations, Performer boxer briefs, and a travel bag to hold your goodies. Use our exclusive code DC for 20% off, free shipping with the code at manscaped.com. That's 20% off, free shipping with the code DC at manscaped.com. RC, we have been lucky to have Manscaped on board with us from the start. But last weekend, we saw the return of the Viper, TJ Dillashaw. And look, man, recaps have been done to death to this point. But for me, it's about what's next. Because when a former king, a guy that ruled the division, makes his return, it's big news. It's on the tip of everybody's tongue. So after what TJ Dillashaw did to the number 2 ranked bantamweight in the world in Corey Sandhagen, very competitive fight. What do you want to see from the former champion? Because for me, he showed toughness, durability. He showed that he's still the same TJ Dillashaw from before the suspension. So when he wins a fight like that, after a 2-year suspension, what's next for the former champion TJ Dillashaw?
Well, to me, DC, I think TJ Dillashaw is waiting for the Peter Yan, Aljo Sterling winner to get his shot at the title. I felt like the reason you put a TJ Dillashaw from his 2 years, fresh off a 2-year suspension against a guy like Corey Sandhagen is because you want to see where he is. You understand that he's getting a little long in the tooth. He may not have a ton of fights left, but you get the excitement that he brings. And he brought that excitement against Corey Sandhagen, right? He comes out, he gets his knee injured in the first round. He fights through that, a nasty gash on his eye. He continues to fight through that. He controls the octagon. He walks Corey Sandhagen down the entire fight. Even the Eagle comes out and says, hey, we need to see Peter Yan, TJ Dillashaw for the belt. But Peter Yan has to win the belt first. He has to go out and recapture it from Aljo Sterling. We all know about the illegal knee that took his belt away from him. But if Peter Yan or Aljo Sterling win that fight, whoever's the champion, I believe they face TJ Dillashaw next, and that's going to be a hell of a fight for all of us.
It's going to be a fantastic fight. And honestly, I don't want anything other than that for TJ Dillashaw. He showed last weekend that he's still the very elite of the elite. And that's why you see it in the bantamweight rankings. He's the number 2 ranked bantamweight in the world, only behind Petr Yan. And I got to be honest with you. If Aljamain Sterling wasn't the champion due to that illegal knee, TJ Dillashaw would not have entered the rankings at number 2. He would have gone right back to number 1. If Petr Yan would have continued that fight and won in the way that it was trending,
DC, you think
TJ
that's the
would have
fight
jumped
he
right
gets
back
first?
in. No, I'm saying that if he would have
After beating
won
Corey.
the fight, right? Because Petr Yan was beating Aljamain Sterling. Petr Yan was
Right,
beating Aljamain
right.
Sterling. He seemed to be on his way to winning that fight, right? Then there would be a little more clarity in the division. TJ Dillashaw beats a Corey Sandhagen. He would have went right to number
I
one.
got you.
He wouldn't be ranked number 2.
That makes
right?
sense.
So he would be the number 1 ranked bantamweight in the world, and he would be in line for the title shot against the champ Petr Yan. But those guys have been scheduled again finally, right? They're rescheduled to fight down in Abu Dhabi. It's going to give us an idea of what is next for the champion TJ Dillashaw. But listen, TJ Dillashaw had a ton of injuries going into the fight. He spoke about his knees. He spoke about not sparring. He spoke about having to deal with so much as he went back into the fight that after the fight, dude's got to have surgery. So it almost works in terms of a timeline that Aljo and Piotr will fight at the end of October, and then TJ will have his surgery very soon. I think this week at some point, get on the recovery. When the winner of that fight is ready to go next, TJ Dillashaw will be waiting, healthy. But I'm telling you, after last weekend, I told everybody going into the fight, if TJ looked like a shell of himself, RC, people would attribute everything he did in the past to the PEDs. But he didn't. He looked exactly the same. So TJ Dillashaw is an absolute dog. And guess what, RC? Dude is just really, really good at fighting. He's just really good at fighting.
He really is, man. And the thing that was exciting for me, DC, I know we don't want to talk a lot about what happened in recap, was him having to face adversity. Having to face adversity against someone as clean as Corey Sandhagen in his skill, in his footwork, in his striking, and fighting through that, whether it was the early knee injury or it was the cut on his eye or going into the 5th round in what could have seemingly been a 2-2 fight. TJ Dillashaw did everything he needed to do to get that win. And Corey Sandhagen said it himself after the fight. I didn't do enough. So now it's time to see if TJ Dillashaw can continue that in the winner when he faces the winner of Sterling Yan, because that's something that we need to see. And that's the only reason you even fight back to be a part of the UFC again. If you're TJ Dillashaw, it's about championships.
It's only about championships for TJ Dillashaw. And listen, the handsome Dean Thomas had something to say last weekend during the fight, because we saw the co-main event. We saw those younger guys fighting early in the card. The handsome Dean Thomas then says, I'm saying it loud and clear. Bantamweight is currently the best division in the UFC. And this is not a debate. I am here to tell you, Dean Thomas, for as handsome as you are, for as knowledgeable as you are, I don't agree. I don't agree that it's the best division, but I do believe it's very, very good. And when you look at the top 5 guys, when you look at Petr Yan, and you look at Aljo, and you look at Dillashaw, and you look at Rob Font, and you look at Jose Aldo, I mean, when you look at those 5 guys, then you get down to Cody Garbrandt, Marlon Moraes, Frankie Edgar, Dominic Cruz, Merab Dvalishvili. Listen, Merab is as good as they come, and he's down at 11. When you look at the weight class, it's very, very good. But to make such a bold claim that it is now better than lightweight, that is now better than 145 and 170, that's so bold. And I don't agree with Dean Thomas. Very good, but RC, you can't possibly think that this is the glamour division, the best division in the UFC.
DC, it's definitely not the glamour division. I don't think that people are clamoring, even as good as Petr Yan is, are clamoring to see him fight, right? We're not letting those guys headline pay-per-views and different things like that. But when you look at the division, it is extremely deep. You got down to the 11th ranked fighter, the 12th ranked fighter, and you can see, okay, these are guys who have opportunities to beat some of these top 5 ranked fighters in the division. I don't think you could say that about every division. My question to you is, if Yan does beat Aljo Sterling, or if he had beaten him the first time, and now we look at the top of that division, and that division goes Petr Yan, and then it slides right to TJ Dillashaw, do you think people view the bantamweight division differently? Is it the fact that the champion, even though the rule said he's supposed to win the fight, is it the fact that the champion isn't a guy that people are clamoring for, as we believe undisputedly this is the guy that's supposed to have the belt?
You know, I got to be honest, man. Petr Yan was the guy that was winning the fight. You know, and it's hard because I don't want to take anything from Aljo. Aljo did nothing wrong. He got kneed illegally. But Petr Yan was on his way to winning that fight and keeping his title. Anytime that happens, it takes a long time. In a lot of title defenses, this is from a guy that knows to establish yourself as the champion of that weight and for people to accept you. So for Aljamain, he has to win this one against Yan. He has to win this one, and then after he wins, now people may start, they'll go, okay, guy's the champ. But you can't, it takes a while, especially if you don't get an opportunity right away. He gets an opportunity to fight that guy the first fight back. But here's one thing about why I believe that Dean Thomas may be a little bit off base. We're going out to Abu Dhabi. They're fighting on a UFC fight, right? They're fighting on a numbered UFC fight. But that numbered UFC fight is not a pay-per-view, right? And when you are a high-level, high-recognition division, you don't fight for free. And I think that is an indication of where the UFC views the bantamweights right now. But it can still change, right? 145 was not a division before that you thought of as pay-per-view main event guys. But then that was changed with Conor McGregor. And now Volkanovski and Ortega are going to fight for a championship in a pay-per-view. Holloway always fought on a pay-per-view. So I think it's going to take some time and work for the bantamweights to be viewed in that regard. Right now, we still see them seen as a smaller division where they may be on free television.
Yeah, well, you know, it just when you get that guy in the division that people are excited to see. When he fights, it starts to bring the pay-per-views. It starts to bring the money. And that's like what Jerry Maguire said, man. If you want to show me that you're the top division in the UFC, show me the money. But when you get to these fights, and you talked a little bit about TJ Dillashaw and the injuries that he sustained throughout his training camp, I think that's a very interesting conversation. But let's start that conversation by listening to TJ Dillashaw explain.
The second camp around, I could not stay healthy. First injury was I pinched this nerve in my foot doing a slider board, and it would not, I mean, up until 2 days ago, I had to work out with shoes on, you know. It was like the worst thing I could have been dealing with. So I didn't get this, and then I tore my MCL on my right knee and hurt my left shoulder as well, too, through the whole camp. So it was a real rough camp, and, you know, I didn't want to obviously talk about it because I didn't want to make no excuses, or I just needed to get out there. It had been too effing long. There was no way I was going to pull out from the fight.
I mean, if you're TJ Dillashaw and you're dealing with some of these injuries throughout your camp, you already feel that you were at a disadvantage. But he understood the position that he was in. It kind of makes me think a little bit about the positions I was in playing football, being an undrafted free agent, knowing that you couldn't get injured in training camp. I remember there was a scrimmage that I started at the gunner, right? So I had all these reps on special teams. Then I was the first safety out. I made the first 4 tackles, knocked down a pass, and I end up getting pulled because I can't breathe, right? And so I remember walking into the locker room and calling my mom, calling my wife, and being like, they're going to cut me. I'm an undrafted guy. I couldn't finish the scrimmage. This is going to be it for me. Can you explain a little bit, DC, of what a UFC or a fight training camp is like as compared to a football training camp when we're preparing to play 16 games, hopefully 20 games, and you guys are focused on one opponent and one night?
Well, you know, the fights are given to you months in advance, right? Especially when you're fighting at an elite level. So for me, it was always 12 weeks. 4-week pre-camp to get myself ready to train through an 8-week training camp, right? You harden the body. You start to prepare yourself for 2-a-days and getting ready. But the injuries do happen because you're kicking, you're punching, you're fighting with all of your teammates. So what you have to do is really try to just manage things, especially when you're managing it with some of the best fighters in the world. But Ryan, there are no guarantees. I've had to pull out of fights before, right? I pulled out of a Jones fight at UFC 197. I pulled out a fight against Rumble Johnson one time when we were supposed to fight in Vancouver because the injuries do happen. But I think that it's a matter of how much does it mean to that person? You know, we look at people right now having to pull out of things that mean so much. there are things that you can overcome, and there are things that you can't overcome. I think the biggest story right now in sports is everything that's going on with Simone Biles and her mental health, right? She can't overcome that to compete. But what TJ Dillashaw was able to do was compartmentalize the injuries, compartmentalize that desire to get back into the octagon. And there are things you can overcome. There are things that you can't overcome. And as I stated myself, I've had to pull out. We've seen at the highest of the highest level where people just can't do it. TJ Dillashaw in this instance showed that his desire to get back out there was stronger than anything he went through. But unfortunately, Ryan, now it leads to him having to go under the knife now to get all those injuries that he incurred to get taken care of.
DC, I think that's what's even more impressive about TJ Dillashaw's outing, right? About his fight against Corey Sandhagen, understanding you're fighting an elite level fighter, a championship level fighter in Corey Sandhagen, understanding throughout training camp you've had these injuries. You couldn't have the full camp that you needed to have, and you add that to coming off of a 2-year suspension. It makes me think about the difference between team sports and the individual sport that the UFC or that MMA or combat sports are. Because I know that if I can't play, I know that if I'm injured or if I can't finish training camp, it not only affects me, but it affects my teammates. It affects my standing on the team. Whereas when you're a fighter, that affects you individually. And obviously you have a camp and you have coaches, but if TJ Dillashaw misses this opportunity, or let's think to ourselves, if TJ Dillashaw goes out against Corey Sandhagen and one of those injuries is the reason why he loses the fight, he has to internalize that all on his own. And so to me, that's what's so much more difficult about training camps for fighters. You know that there's a limited amount of time to get ready for a particular fight. There's also a limited amount of times on how long your career will last. And so having to make that decision in that moment seems so difficult to me. And when it's different, because I knew if I missed the first game or if I missed the second game, it was a possibility I was going to play 13. I was going to play 14. We had an opportunity to go to a Super Bowl. It's so much different and finite when we're talking about the fight game.
Well, it's the stresses, right? It's the stresses of getting there. That's one of the biggest things, you know, and I point back to the conversation Habib had with the kids the other day. In the build-up to McGregor, he said the whole fight camp, he wanted to fight him so badly, just worried about injuries, worried about making sure that everything stayed together on fight night. So it was like just really staying in the moment and staying safe enough. Because if you try to be too safe, then you're not prepared, and now you got real problems. But Ryan, Saturday night, I'm at the UFC Apex. There are fans in there now. And TJ Dillashaw is the story. But, bro, it was not the only story coming out of Vegas on Saturday night.
No, it was not, bro.
The judging has become a real issue to the point that, Ryan, when I walk into the octagon to do the interviews, at times I'll get the decision. Like Saturday, I was getting the decisions, right, because I wanted to know. A lot of times I tell my producers, I don't want to know because I want to be surprised. I don't want to stand in the wrong place and tip somebody off as to who won the fight.
Right.
So Saturday, I'm getting these decisions, and I'm having to keep my face straight because I just don't agree. I don't agree at all.
Wrong. Yeah.
I don't agree with the Barber decision. I don't believe with the Paiva decision. And I got to be honest, RC, before I went out for the co-main event, Uriah Faber came over to the table, and I go, you're going to need a gift in order to get this decision like you got earlier. And lo and behold, Paiva won the fight. Best case he could have hoped for was a draw because he got beat so badly in round number 1. But again, nobody gave, outside of judge number 2, Sal D'Amato, they gave Paiva a 10-8 first round. Phillips, a 10-8 first round, when Phillips utterly dominated Howland Paiva. How in the world are they not seeing this? So look, this is verdict, right? Global Scorecard, one of the most well-respected judging platforms in all of mixed martial arts. And look at this, 10-8 round 1, 9-6 Paiva round 2, 9-3 for Phillips. Paiva 1-2, but when you overall judge a score, that first round by Kyler Phillips was so strong that you would think he had won the fight, but 27-9, 28-6. Take off the extra, and you're 28-28, a draw, Ryan Clark. The judging now has gotten really, really bad, and nobody can feel good when you walk back to the center of the octagon in a very close fight.
You know, and what's the crazy thing about that fight is Kyler Phillips was so dominant in the first round. I didn't even think the fight would actually go to decision. And then you see Paiva kind of work his way in the second round. And then the third round, it was a very close round, but I felt like Paiva ended up winning that one too. I thought it was going to be a draw. But that's what the fight game is about. And that's why judging is so hard. If you take the entire 15 minutes, you say to yourself, Kyler Phillips was more effective. Kyler Phillips was more aggressive. But that's not how the fights are scored, DC. So if you have a situation where only one of the judges scored that first round, which I believe was by far and easily a 10-8 round, if only one of the judges gives Phillips that 10-8 round, you end up with a decision that you got. Even more dramatic to me was the Macy Barber Miranda Maverick decision. And maybe you were on the other side of that. But round 1 and 2 were so easily Miranda Maverick rounds that we shouldn't even have to discuss. And for the fact that Macy Barber actually got one of those rounds on the scorecard was crazy to me. And so now you put her in position to win this fight. And that was one of those things. I watched Macy Barber fight off of her back foot, so much so that one of her coaches screams, "You actually have to try to hit her." When have we ever heard that scream from the corner of a fighter in the octagon? That never happens. And so Macy Barber obviously turns it on in the third round. I agree with all of the judges that should have been a round scored for her. But Miranda Maverick was robbed on this decision. And to me, when you're a fighter and you're an up-and-coming fighter like Maverick is, and you come out and you press the round 1 and through round 2 and you win those rounds, you deserve to have your hand raised after the fight. They don't get these fights back, DC. Yeah, you can run it back later.
No.
You can get a rematch. You can try to come back up the ranks, but you don't get that particular fight back, and this is a huge deal to me.
This one was bad. It was bad in the vein of Miranda Maverick deserved to win the fight. Seemed like rounds 1 and 2 were Miranda's, and when you have a champion like Valentina Shevchenko, you're trying to build momentum towards someone fighting her, right? Macy, while still a fantastic young fighter, I don't want her to think for any second that I'm crapping on her, but Miranda seemed to be the one that had the momentum. But now that momentum stumped for however long it is, Macy Barber now has to continue to build on what she just got. But we've seen some bad ones. And I think part of the reason is we've got some boxing judges calling these fights, or judging these fights. They don't quite understand the grappling and the transition on the ground. They kind of act like you a little bit, but they're watching these fights and they don't know. Like,
again?
When it comes to the grappling at times, they're not giving enough value to the takedowns, the top control, and everything else. And that's why they're judging the fights in the way that they're judging them. And you know, man, it's unfortunate. And I hope that at some point we can get former fighters, guys that have been in there, guys that know that when two athletes come together and there's a short right hand that lands that may be missed by the blind eye, but they can see it because they've experienced on so many times. I think that is when we are going to see judging reach the level that it should for a sport that's as big as mixed martial arts and the UFC.
No, I absolutely agree with that, DC. It's about experience. It's about understanding. There were times with even me watching the fight and listening to some of the things that you guys were saying on the broadcast, is like, okay, how is this octagon control going to be seen? How is this, whether it was a takedown that was defensed or one that was completed, how will that be scored against maybe some of the significant strikes that we saw on the feet? And I do believe that a level of expertise is needed. In so many different sports, we have this conversation, whether it's football and you have officials who've never played the game, basketball officials who've never played the game or don't necessarily know exactly what they're looking for. All they can do is turn to a rule book. Sometimes the black and white of the rule book doesn't necessarily tell the true tale of the fight. And I think we saw that in a couple occasions this weekend. And going forward, I don't want to see that again because these fighters do not get these opportunities back. You just never know. You could be cut from the UFC and actually won a fight that you lost on the scorecard that gets you out of your job.
Well, you and I both know, Ryan, from experience, right? A lot is momentum. And when your momentum gets crushed, right? We've seen football teams go on runs that teams that we didn't think were very good, right? But then the momentum starts to build, and the next thing you know, they're 6-1, they're 7. They start to believe. Fighters are the same way. When they get, it's hard for them to rebuild the momentum that they may have had before, and then you see them losing 2, 3 in a row, looking at being cut, being in must-win situations. Now, let me tell you who's not in a must-win situation, Ryan. You heard that? You like the way I did that? You like the way I did that,
I like
RC?
segue, nice segue. Do a little TV.
You like, oh yeah, nice segue, right? So, who's not in a must-win is the champ, Jan Blachowicz, as he fights Glover Teixeira in Abu Dhabi. Also, Petr Yan and Aljamain Sterling rematch in Abu Dhabi. But the fight that I'm most hoping gets made in Abu Dhabi is RDA versus Islam Makhachev. Those guys want to fight. They're online talking trash to each other. They're telling each other, I want it like you want to bring it. How excited are you for those 2 title fights in Abu Dhabi, but also the idea that the third fight on the card could be Makhachev versus RDA?
I mean, that would create that would. We talked a little bit about not having pay-per-view or not having the correct headliners. When you make a fight card that has those 3 fights at the top of it, that is big time. Obviously, everyone wants to see Islam Makhachev against some of the top competition. And so if you bring him in there against RDA, right, someone who has been a champion inside the octagon, someone with that much experience, that much toughness, that seemingly wants this fight as much as Islam Makhachev wants this fight, those are the things we sign up for. Those are the fights I'm sitting at home on my couch, tweeting every other minute, hoping that DC calls somebody at the top of the UFC executive chain and says, put my dog's tweet on the screen. That is a fight that I am sitting down and waiting for. And obviously, everybody wants to see Jan and Glover. Everyone can't wait to see Petr Yan have an opportunity to get his belt back from Aljo Sterling. But to have that fight, a up-and-comer and a UFC big-time veteran get an opportunity to do battle, those are the things that have made the UFC one of the most popular sports in the world, not just America. They have to make that happen.
You know, the UFC makes the fights that people feel should happen. And honestly, RDA right now is the fight for Islam, right? Islam needs one of those big-name guys. If he's going to truly make a run. If you remember back in the day, Khabib beat RDA. That was one of his earliest big victories on his run to the championship. So for Islam to fight a guy like Dos Anjos, a guy who looked phenomenal in his return to 155 against Paul Felder, a guy that has skills across